The Whispering Wreck. The rain came down in sheets the night Daniel Voss drove into Blackwater Hollow. The kind of rain that turns roads into rivers and makes every shadow look like it's moving toward you. He was 34, recently divorced, recently unemployed, and recently in possession of a letter from a great-aunt he had never met. The letter had arrived 3 weeks earlier, postmarked from a town that didn't appear on most maps anymore. Daniel, it read in careful, slanted handwriting. The house on Wrecker's Point is yours now. I kept it waiting. Come before the equinox. The sea remembers debts. The signature was simply Eleanor Voss. No relation he could recall, but the solicitor's envelope included a deed, a key, and a bank draft for enough money to keep him afloat for a year if he lived cheaply. He had nothing left to lose in Manchester. No job, no flat after the lease ended. No reason not to drive 6 hours west through the storm to see what waited. Blackwater Hollow appeared just after midnight, a cluster of slate-roofed cottages clinging to the cliffs like barnacles. The single road ended at a rusted iron gate marked Private NO Through Road. Beyond it the headland stretched into darkness, and at its tip stood the house. Tall, narrow, 3 stories of blackened stone with windows like empty eye sockets. Wrecker's Point had been built in 1847 by a man named Josiah Voss, Daniel's great-great-grandfather, according to the deed, who made his fortune salvaging cargo from ships that never quite made it past the reef called the Black Teeth. Daniel parked the car in the overgrown drive, killed the engine, and sat listening to the rain hammer the roof. The house loomed ahead, lit only by his headlights. He took the key from the envelope, stepped out into the downpour, and ran for the porch. Inside smelled of damp plaster, old wood, and something metallic, old pennies or blood. He found a light switch that worked. A single bare bulb flickered on in the hallway, throwing long shadows up the staircase. The floorboards creaked under his trainers as he moved from room to room. Furniture remained under dust sheets. In the parlor, a grandfather clock stood silent, its hands frozen at 3:17. He found a note taped to the mantelpiece in the same handwriting as the letter. Daniel, do not go down to the beach after dark. Do not answer the voices. The wreck is not empty. He laughed, a short bark that sounded too loud in the empty house. Superstition, old women and their ghost stories. He carried his bag upstairs, chose the first bedroom he found, dropped onto the mattress still in its plastic, and slept without dreaming. He woke at dawn to silence. The rain had stopped. From the window he could see the headland dropping sharply to a crescent of black shingle. Beyond it the sea was flat and gray, the horizon swallowed by low cloud. At low tide the Black Teeth showed, jagged basalt spines rising 20 feet from the water like the ribs of something long dead. Daniel spent the morning exploring. The house was larger than it looked from outside. Rooms opening into rooms, corridors turning back on themselves. In the attic he found trunks of women's clothes from the 1920s, photographs in silver frames, and a leather-bound journal with Eleanor's name on the flyleaf. The first entry was dated 1973. Josiah's bargain still holds. The sea gave us wealth, we give it watchers. Tonight the wreck called again. I heard my mother singing from the water. I did not go down. He read on. Entries spanned decades. Eleanor described hearing voices on the wind, seeing lights under the waves where no boat should be, finding footprints on the beach that led from the water to the house and stopped at the back door. She wrote of nights when the grandfather clock started ticking again without being wound, always stopping at 3:17. The hour the brigantine Morning Star had struck the reef in 1851, carrying a cargo of silver ingots and 37 souls who never reached shore. Daniel closed the journal, uneasy but still skeptical. He needed proof, something tangible for the YouTube channel he still half-planned to restart. He set up his camera on a tripod in the parlor, hit record, and spoke to the lens. Day 1 at Wrecker's Point. Inherited house, creepy history, alleged ghosts. Let's see what happens. He left the camera running and went downstairs to the cellar door. It was locked. The key from the envelope fit. The stairs descended into cool darkness. He found a string pull for a single bulb. Below was a stone vault lined with shelves. On them sat dozens of small wooden boxes, each labeled with dates and ship names. He opened one at random, Morning Star, 1851. Inside lay a single silver ingot, dull with age but heavy in his hand. Another box held a child's porcelain doll, its eyes cracked. A third contained a gold pocket watch stopped at 3:17. He carried the watch upstairs, set it beside the camera, and waited. Nothing happened. The house stayed quiet. At dusk he cooked pasta on the ancient stove, ate alone at the long kitchen table, and tried to convince himself the unease in his chest was only imagination. Night fell early. By 9 the windows were black mirrors. He sat in the parlor with the lights off, recorder running beside the camera, listening. At first only the sea, distant, steady, then a sound like someone tapping glass. He stood, crossed to the window. Nothing outside but darkness and the faint white line of surf. The tapping came again, from the back of the house. He moved through the kitchen, past the scullery, to the rear door. The tapping was louder here, deliberate, patient. He opened the door a crack. Cold air rushed in, carrying salt and something sweeter, like lilies left too long in water. The tapping stopped. On the stone step lay a single wet footprint, bare, small, a woman's. It glistened under the porch light, then slowly faded as though the stone were drinking it. Daniel shut the door, locked it, backed away. His heart hammered. He returned to the parlor, checked the camera, still recording, and sat on the sofa, staring at the grandfather clock. His hands had moved. They now pointed to 2:58. He told himself it was a trick of light, a faulty mechanism. He went upstairs, locked the bedroom door, and tried to sleep. At 3:17 exactly the clock began to chime downstairs. 17 slow, deep strokes that vibrated through the floorboards. Daniel sat up in bed, sweat cold on his skin. The chimes ended. Silence returned, thicker than before. Then the singing started. It came from outside, from the direction of the beach, high, clear, wordless, the kind of lullaby a mother might hum to a frightened child. It rose and fell with the waves. Daniel pressed his palms to his ears. The sound slid through anyway, into his skull, into his blood. He dressed, grabbed the torch from his bag, and went downstairs. The camera light was still red. Good. Evidence. He opened the back door. The night was moonless. The torch beam cut a white tunnel down the path that led to the cliff steps. He followed it, heart loud in his throat. The singing grew clearer as he descended. Now words, faint, in a language he didn't recognize but somehow understood. At the bottom, the shingle crunched under his boots. Arthur realized the names. They were the names he had found in the archives of the Brutalist coastal station. The missing researchers. They hadn't died. They had been digitized, dissolved into an immortal loop of high-frequency audio data, trapped by the geometry of the sea cave below. And now they were speaking here in the lead-line tomb of London. Thorne, stop this! Arthur shouted, his voice swallowed by the acoustic pressure. Thorne ignored him. He was striking more forks, building a terrifying dissonant chord. F-flat, F-sharp, G-natural, the tritone, the devil in music. The static figures were descending, closing the circle around the iron chair. They were extending hands made of smoke and gray pixels. Arthur watched in pure, cold horror as Thorne's legs began to blur, his skin turning into a shimmering field of pixelated gray static. Ethelgard Dynamics wants to master the sound, Thorn laughed, his voice now amplified by the hearing trumpet, vibrating with a gravelly artifact. They want to build a weapon. They are fools. My family knew the truth. The sound is not a tool. The sound is a master. It is a perfect mathematical engine of conversion. Thorn was no longer Thorn. He was item 713. He was item 714. He was the waveform, the slow, wet crunching sound he had heard in the Land Rover radio began to manifest in the lead hall. Slap, squelch, slap, squelch. The figure of a woman in a yellow raincoat manifested in the static circle. She stepped into the light. She had no face, only a vertical, jagged slit where her features should have been. The slit vibrated, producing the man's gravelly voice. "One for the tide," she whispered, her sound projected by item 713 directly into Arthur's skull. Arthur's forensic mind, fighting against the auditory madness, saw his only variable. The lead hall was a system. It needed a perfect acoustic seal. He spun and ran for the only entry point, a massive lead-lined blast door. But the giant butler was standing in his path. The man was not human anymore. His eyes were wide open, staring at the empty plinth where item 713 usually rested, but reflecting only a field of gray, flickering visual static. "You came to deliver the brief, Mr. Pendleton," the butler said, his voice now a synchronized chorus of the lost researchers. "The brief is complete. You are counted." Arthur, acting on raw, kinetic instinct, saw the massive iron lever on the wall next to the butler. The manual lockdown. He didn't try to fight the giant. Instead, he dived under his grasp, scrambling up the curved wall, and with a desperate two-handed lunge, slammed the lever down. A massive, lead-lined steel bolt slammed into place with a sound that felt like the cracking of the world. K.R.A.K.O. The whispering gallery of Silas Thorne imploded. The perfect acoustic resonance was broken. The thousands of voices collapsed back into white noise. The lead walls, designed to absorb sound, began to rapidly vibrate at a frequency that dissolved their molecular structure. The ceiling arches groaned, and chunks of ancient concrete and lead honeycomb rained down. The giant butler was crushed instantly. Thorne, caught in the conversion process, was digitized, his consciousness preserved not as an echo, but as a permanent, repeating audio loop, trapped within the very lead alloy of item 713. His final scream was a pure, ascending harmonic chord that set Arthur's teeth on fire. Arthur rolled onto the gravel bed outside the demolished foundation of the old sanitarium. The morning sun was just hitting the east end of London. He lay there, his heart a physical ache, gasping for air that tasted of dust and electricity. He looked back at the collapsed structure. There was no sign of Thorne or the giant butler or the static figures. There was only item 713, the twisted hearing trumpet, lying half-buried in the rubble. The crow that had welcomed him to Silver Creek months ago was now perched on the plinth of black velvet that Thorne's butler had brought, watching him. It didn't look at him with appetite. It looked at him with intelligence. He had spent his life analyzing acoustic systems. He understood the necessity of a balanced equation. The blackmouth tapes hadn't just recorded an anomaly. They had activated a system that required a guardian. Silas Thorne had been its last master. He crawled through the rubble and pulled item 713 from the wreckage. He placed the cold alloy horn to his left ear. There was no static now, just the slow, wet crunching sound, counting something, and layered just beneath it, a new sound. The rhythmic, precise sound of a pen scratching against paper. The loop was incomplete. It needed an auditor. A few days later, a representative from Ethelgard Dynamics, a man in a tailored gray suit, drove a black sedan into the East End. He found Arthur sitting on a low wall, waiting. Item 713 was on the plinth next to him, wrapped in black velvet. The Ethelgard man took the item without speaking, placing it in his briefcase. He handed Arthur a cashier's check for triple his rate. "The Grey Gables brief is complete, Mr. Pendleton," the man said, his voice a low vibration that seemed to harmonize with the faint hum emanating from the closed briefcase. "We will send the next auditor to the coastal station next week. We'll need the space to build the new array." Arthur smiled, a faint, weary smile that felt almost human. "The frequency is perfect, Mr. Vance. The silence is getting crowded." He closed his notebook. The final entry in frantic, scratching handwriting wasn't statistics. It was a new list. Entry, Thorn, Elias. Status, digital convert. Inventory complete. Entry, the Miller household, units 001003. Status, returned to the symmetry. The auditor began to write the first name of the next ledger. The symmetry was restored. The math was perfect. The system lived and the peak was satisfied. And sometimes the only way to perfect the equation is to remove the human variable. The acoustic debt always finds its way home. And in Blackmouth Bay, the sound never stops. It just waits for someone to listen.